Today, I'd like to discuss an observation that emerged repeatedly throughout my Shadowdelve research. At first, it appeared insignificant, one of those details that quietly presents itself again and again until eventually it becomes impossible to ignore. The observation was this: most people believe they know the individuals around them, their friends, their family, their coworkers, their partners. But I'm no longer convinced this is true. In fact, the more closely I observe human behavior, the more I arrive at a rather unsettling conclusion. Many people spend their entire lives interacting with masks, not because others are intentionally deceptive, no, but because people rarely reveal who they truly are. And perhaps more importantly, most people rarely discover who they truly are themselves. Think about it. How often do we meet a person and immediately begin constructing a story around them? Within moments, we've already decided who they are. Perhaps confident, arrogant, intelligent, maybe trustworthy, slightly reserved, perhaps dangerous, interesting, or forgettable. The mind does this automatically. And this is because it dislikes uncertainty. It prefers conclusions. But conclusions are often the enemy of understanding. The moment we believe we figured someone out, observation ends, curiosity dies. And from that point forward, we no longer interact with the person. We interact with our perception of them. From the archives of my research, I came across another peculiar pattern that people frequently misidentify the source of behavior. They see the results, but rarely the cause. Silence is mistaken for weakness. Confidence is mistaken for strength. Kindness is mistaken for innocence. And anger is mistaken for cruelty. Yet behavior often functions much more like a shadow. The shadow is visible, but the object creating it is not. A quiet individual may simply have learned that speaking openly comes at a cost. An arrogant individual may be protecting a fragile sense of self. A constantly cheerful person may be carrying burdens they refuse to share. A person who appears emotionally distant may have once trusted the wrong individual and never fully recovered. So the behavior is real, but the explanation people attach to it is often fiction. And fiction has a remarkable way of disguising itself as certainty. One of the stranger discoveries I encountered was that people are often less honest with themselves than they are with others. Many construct identities that the same way they construct a house, carefully, deliberate, brick by brick, an image with an image, perhaps using a role or their reputation, a version of themselves they wish the world to see, but eventually they become so attached to that version that they begin to believe it themselves. And when that happens, the mask is no longer something they wear. It becomes something they inhabit. Perhaps you've encountered people like this. Or perhaps, if we're being honest, you've encountered moments of it within yourself. Because all of us possess masks: the agreeable mask, the strong mask, the successful mask, the indifferent mask. the wounded mask, the victim mask, the rescuer mask, the rebel mask, the scholar mask, the leader mask. The list is endless. And while masks often begin as protection, they have a tendency to become prisons. What makes this particularly difficult is that masks can be maintained for astonishing lengths of time, sometimes weeks, months, or even years. But there is one thing I have observed repeatedly: every mask eventually fails. Not because people intend for it to fail, but because maintaining a false version of oneself requires constant effort. And effort eventually gives way to fatigue. This is why character reveals itself most clearly during moments of pressure, during moments of loss, of conflict, of failure, when they experience fear or uncertainty, perhaps exhaustion. The mask during these situations weakens, the performance fractures, and for a brief moment, something genuine emerges. This is one reason I pay close attention to patterns rather than words, because words can easily be rehearsed, patterns cannot. Words reveal intentions, but patterns reveal the truth. If you wish to understand a person, pay less to attention to what they claim to be and more attention to what repeatedly emerges despite their effort to conceal it. Because eventually the contradictions begin to surface. The generous person who only gives when others are watching, or the humble person who constantly seeks recognition, or the confident person terrified of rejection, or perhaps the fearless person controlled by fear. The contradictions is often where the truth resides. Now, before we continue, there is an uncomfortable realization hidden within all of this. Learning to see people as they truly are is not merely about understanding others. It requires understanding ourselves. Because the same distortions we observe in others often exist within us. We perhaps judge, we assume, we project, or we create stories. And perhaps most concerning of all, we often mistake those stories for reality. The longer I studied this observation, the more I began to suspect that perception itself is deeply unreliable, not because we are incapable of seeing, but because we rarely see without interpretation. We don't simply observe people, we filter them through memory, through our own fears, through a desire, through our previous experiences, through prejudice, through expectations we may have. What remains after all those filters may bear little resemblance to the actual person standing before us. And perhaps that is why genuine understanding is so rare. It requires patience, it requires humility, it requires real curiosity, the willingness to admit that we may be wrong. Because most people seek certainty, very few seek understanding. And the difference between the two is larger than it first appears. Anyways, this was something I came across which I found interesting because the deeper I ventured into it, the more I realized it wasn't really about other people at all. It was about perception and how easily perception can deceive us. Perhaps that leaves us with an uncomfortable question. How many people in your life do you truly know? Not the version they present, not the version you've created, but the person beneath both. And if that question feels difficult, there's another. How much of yourself remains hidden behind your own mask? Perhaps that is where understanding begins, not with others, but with ourselves. And until next time, remember, the deepest mysteries are rarely hidden in forgotten places. They are hidden in plain sight, behind ordinary faces. And the raven is always watching.